Now that we have completed steps 1, 2, and 3 of the post-processing checklist, we're ready to move on. We're going to start with step 4, adjusting highlights. And now most of the time I adjust highlights by taking them way down. And so you can see here, if I take the highlights down to all the way down to the left, that you don't really see much happening in this particular image. There's a lot of light areas, and so if I turn on the show highlights and shadows or in the histogram up there, and I start playing with the highlight slider and increasing the highlights, you'll be able to see some of the effects. Next, I'm moving on to the whites and the darks. This is step 6, adjusting whites and blacks using the histogram as a reference. And so in Lightroom, I'm using the whites and the blacks sliders. And you can see the difference that it makes in both of these areas. And you can watch the histogram change as I move these sliders to the left and to the right. That's the beauty of Lightroom, and often I'll take sliders to extremes just so that I'm really aware and can see what is exactly being affected. Now I could mess with the exposure if I was trying to adjust the whites and the darks, but this adjusts the overall exposure of the whole image, not just affecting the whites and the blacks as it does with the white and black slider. Okay, so we'll get all that straightened out, and next up is increasing contrast. Digital images by nature just aren't very contrasty, and almost all of them can be improved by increasing the contrast. And as you've read in the article on the blog, this is a luminance contrast slider, and how much you adjust it is really subjective. Our next step then is to move on to texture and clarity. And so if we zoom in, you can see that the fort walls really have a lot of texture. And I want to make sure that that is highlighted in this image. And so again, if I play with this clarity slider, you can see what's happening as I increase and decrease clarity. So let's zoom back out, and I'm going to increase clarity. And if you notice that the saturation seems to decrease as I bump up the clarity. So I'm going to do it a little bit, but I am going to also change the texture. I don't want to go too far with clarity, although this could benefit from the grungy look, but that's not what I'm going for right here. So we will maybe stop right about there. So our next steps then, now that we have increased clarity, which as you saw reduced the vibrance a little bit, or the saturation, we're now going to work on bringing some of this back. Vibrance will look whole lot better than adjusting simply saturation. And again, if you move the slider really far right, I mean, you can do this so much that it looks unnatural. And I don't like to have an unreal photo, although the ones that sell the most have the boosted colors. People really like color. So we have that much in the vibrance. So I'll do the vibrance first, and then I will boost my saturation a little bit if needed. But we don't want to do this too much. All right, now we are ready to work on the noise. Now this picture actually doesn't have much noise at all. If it did, in the dark areas, you'd be able to really see what looks like a grain, but it is that would be noise, digital noise. But I used a low ISO and it's fairly well exposed, so there's not a lot of noise, but I'll bump it up a little bit. The luminance slider is the one that I would have used if there was a lot of noise. And so now I'm going to move on to my last step for this initial pass of post-processing and work on sharpening. And so I changed the amount to 50, the radius to 1, and the detail to 50. Those are just the settings that I start with. And then I'm holding down my Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and using the masking slider to reduce the areas that are being sharpened. There's no reason to sharpen the sky at all, and so I don't want to do that. So this is my image after the first pass of processing. Now I am going to go through some additional steps, but these are the 10 steps that I do for every single image that I have. I hope it's been helpful. Let me know in the comments what you think.